Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a live-fire range, not a bake sale. Take your lost and found jacket and clear the area. The words, sharp and dripping with condescension, sliced through the dry desert air. The young recruits, barely men, their faces a mixture of nervous tension and adolescent bravado, erupted in a wave of snickers. The sound was ugly, a chorus of cheap confidence aimed at an easy target. The target in question, a woman who appeared to be in her late 50s, did not react. She stood with a stillness that was utterly alien to the frantic energy of the basic training environment. Her hair, a practical cut of steel gray and dark brown, was pulled back from a face etched with lines of thought, not frailty. She wore simple khaki slacks and a plain blue windbreaker, the kind of anonymous clothing one might wear for a brisk morning walk. The jacket, the object of the drill instructor's scorn, had been knocked from a bench by a clumsy recruit and lay in the fine, reddish dust of the Fort Irwin training grounds. She bent to retrieve it, not with the pained stiffness of age, but with a fluid, economical motion, a single hinge from the waist that spoke of a deep, ingrained physical discipline. She brushed the dust from the sleeve with 3 precise sweeps of her hand. Her eyes, a pale, piercing blue, never left the firing line. From the cool shadow of the observation tower, Colonel Davies watched through binoculars, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. He didn't recognize the woman's face, but he recognized the posture. Even in civilian attire, she held herself at a perfect, unconscious parade rest, her weight evenly distributed, her hands clasped behind her back. It was a ghost of a stance, a muscle memory so profound that it transcended uniform. He'd seen it before in the hardened operators of Delta and the silent professionals of the intelligence community. It was the physical manifestation of a mind that was never, ever at ease. It was the posture of the hunter, the watcher, the silent authority that needed no external validation. The drill instructor, a Sergeant Miller whose jaw seemed permanently clenched in a sneer of superiority, was still talking, basking in the attention of his charges. He saw a lost, confused older woman, an administrative error that had wandered onto his sacred ground. But the colonel, he saw something else. He saw a predator assessing a new environment. He lowered his binoculars, the plastic suddenly slick in his sweating palm. Something was profoundly wrong, or profoundly right, about the woman standing calmly in the face of such juvenile disrespect. If you believe respect is earned in silence, not shouted from a soapbox, type earned in the comments below. Sergeant Miller, puffed up by the easy laughter of his audience, doubled down on his condescension. He strode towards the woman, his boots crunching on the gravel with performative aggression. He stopped a theatrical foot away from her, invading her personal space, a classic intimidation tactic that had always worked on terrified 18-year-olds. You hear me, lady? This isn't the place for civilians. Security will be here in a minute to escort you out, probably for your own safety. You could trip over a shoelace and sue the whole damn army. He winked at the recruits, who dutifully snickered again. One of them, emboldened by the alpha display, shouldered past the woman on his way to the ammunition table, bumping her hard enough to make her shift her footing. He didn't look back, didn't offer a word of apology. In their world, a world defined by shouted orders and rigid hierarchies, she was an anomaly, a zero on the board, less than nothing. She was an obstacle, an irrelevance to be cleared. Yet, the woman, Eva, remained a fixed point of calm in their swirling vortex of manufactured stress. Her gaze did not waver from the recruits currently on the firing line. She was not merely looking. She was deconstructing. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of tactical analysis, processed the scene with cold, terrifying clarity. She saw the recruit in lane 3, his grip too tight, his left hand blanching the knuckles, introducing a subtle tremor that would pull his shots low and to the right. She saw the young woman in lane 5, a natural shooter, but one who held her breath on the trigger squeeze, a rookie mistake that caused her chest to tighten and her aim to wander at the last second. She saw Miller pacing behind them, yelling corrections that were technically accurate but utterly devoid of useful instruction. "Control your breathing, Private," he barked, without ever explaining the simple, rhythmic box breathing technique that would solve the problem instantly. He was a parrot, squawking regulations he had memorized but never truly understood. He was teaching the what, but had no concept of the how or the why. Eva's focus was a shield, rendering the insults and the jostling completely inert. They were background noise like the buzzing of flies, irrelevant to the critical data she was absorbing. In the tower, Colonel Davies felt a chill despite the oppressive heat. He had seen that look before, that intense, analytical stare. It was the gaze of a master artisan examining a flawed piece of work, not with anger, but with a deep, professional disappointment. He remembered a briefing in a dusty tent in Kandahar years ago. A legendary sniper, a ghost known only by the call sign Spectre, was explaining the physics of a mile-long shot to a group of awestruck Green Berets. Spectre had possessed that exact same look of absolute, unnerving focus. The colonel raised his binoculars again, his heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. It couldn't be. Spectre was a myth, a whisper in the halls of Sockham, not a woman in a blue windbreaker being harassed by a drill sergeant on a Tuesday morning. The pinnacle of the day's training was a drill the recruits had only heard about in hushed, fearful tones. The impossible shot. It was a pass-slash-fail event designed less as a test of skill and more as a psychological breaking point. The target was a standard silhouette, but it was placed at 600 meters, the absolute maximum effective range of the standard-issue M4 rifle. To make matters worse, the target would be exposed for only 3 seconds. During that window, a bank of high-intensity strobe lights would flash erratically, designed to destroy the shooter's night vision and induce a flinch response. Simultaneously, a series of concussive sound blasts, mimicking artillery fire, would erupt from speakers placed on either side of the firing line. It was a drill designed to simulate the absolute chaos of combat, to force the recruits to perform a complex, precise action under unimaginable sensory assault. As expected, every single recruit failed, and failed spectacularly. Shots went wide, kicking up plumes of dust 50 feet from target. Some recruits, overwhelmed by the strobes and blasts, didn't even get shot off. The air filled with the bitter smell of failure and unburnt powder. Sergeant Miller's face contorted into a mask of pure rage. His authority was predicated on his ability to forge these kids into soldiers, and their collective failure was a public indictment of his own. "Is this the best you've got?" he roared, his voice cracking with frustration. "My grandmother could shoot better than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. You are a disgrace, an embarrassment to the uniform you haven't even earned yet." He paced the line, his fury a palpable force, but it was the impotent rage of a man who had reached the limits of his own meager abilities. In the ringing silence that followed his tirade, a silence thick with shame and disappointment, a single, deliberate sound cut through the tension. The soft crunch of a footstep on gravel. Eva had taken one step forward. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't announce her intentions. She simply moved from the periphery to the center, her motion drawing every eye on the range. The universe of the training ground seemed to shrink, focusing on this one quiet, unassuming figure. Miller, momentarily stunned by the audacity, found his voice. "Hey, I told you to wait for security. This is a restricted area." His words, which moments before had carried the weight of absolute command, now sounded thin and reedy, a desperate attempt to reclaim a control he had already lost. The woman didn't stop. She continued her calm, measured walk toward the firing line, her destination the weapons rack, where the rifles of the failed recruits sat cooling in the desert heat. The air crackled with anticipation. The recruits, Miller, even the colonel in his tower, held their breath, united in a single, unspoken question. What was about to happen? Eva reached the weapons rack, her movements unhurried and deliberate. She scanned a row of M4 rifles, her eyes passing over the ones with expensive aftermarket optics and customized grips. Her hand settled on the most basic model, a standard-issue rifle identical to the ones the recruits had just used. It was a tool, not a talisman. Her hands, which had appeared merely as the hands of an older woman, now transformed. They moved with a predatory grace, a practiced intimacy that spoke of tens of thousands of hours of repetition. It was the way a master violinist handles a Stradivarius, the way a surgeon handles scalpel. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. She depressed the magazine release. The magazine dropped cleanly into her waiting palm. She pulled the charging handle to the rear, visually and physically inspecting the chamber for any obstruction. She checked the tension on the forward assist. Her fingers danced across the weapon, a diagnostic ballet that took less than 5 seconds but communicated a lifetime of expertise. The recruits watched, mesmerized. They had been taught the mechanics of the weapon, but they had never seen it handled with such reverence, such absolute, symbiotic familiarity. She slapped the magazine back into the well with a firm, audible click, the sound echoing in the profound silence. She turned to Sergeant Miller, who stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, his authority having evaporated in the face of this silent, overwhelming competence. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried the unshakable weight of command. Reset the drill. It was not a request. It was an order. Miller, acting on an instinct far older than his own ego, dumbly nodded and spoke into his radio. Range control, run drill 4-7 again. On my mark, Eva moved to the firing line. She didn't lie prone. She didn't kneel. She didn't even use the provided sandbags for stability. She simply assumed a classic, unsupported standing firing position. Her feet were shoulder-width apart, her body angled slightly to the target, her left elbow tucked firmly against her ribs, creating a rock-solid platform of bone and muscle. It was a stance of perfect biomechanical efficiency, a living demonstration from a textbook she had likely written. "Mark!" Miller yelled, his voice now uncertain. The world erupted. The strobes flashed like violent lightning. The concussive blasts hammered the air, a physical assault on the senses. Through it all, Eva was an island of perfect tranquility. The rifle rose to her shoulder in a single, smooth motion. As the chaos reached its crescendo, there was a single, clean crack. It was not the panic blast of the recruit's shots. It was a precise, surgical sound, a punctuation mark at the end of a very definitive statement. Then, as suddenly as it began, the drill was over. A deafening, absolute silence descended upon the range, a vacuum left in the wake of the impossible. Every eye darted to the large monitor displaying a live feed from a camera at the target. For a moment, the image was unclear, distorted by the shimmering heat waves. Then it focused. The silhouette was clean, untouched, except for one tiny, perfect black circle. It was drilled directly through the center of the head, in the small box designated as the critical zone, a one-hole group. From a standing position, at 600 meters, in the middle of a sensory hurricane, Sergeant Miller stared, his face a canvas of shattered arrogance and dawning horror. A single, choked whisper escaped his lips. No way. That's not possible." The heavy thud of combat boots on the metal stairs of the observation tower was the only sound that dared to disturb the stunned silence. Colonel Davies descended with a speed and purpose that belied his rank. He didn't jog. He moved with the controlled urgency of a man responding to a tectonic shift in his reality. As he stepped onto the gravel of the range, the recruits, jolted from their trance, instinctively snapped to attention, their spines ramrod straight, their eyes locked forward. Sergeant Miller, his face the color of ash, managed a shaky, uncoordinated salute, his arm trembling slightly. The colonel's eyes, however, were not on Miller. They swept past the drill instructor and the terrified recruits as if they were nothing more than scenery. His gaze was locked on the quiet woman who was now methodically clearing her weapon, her movements just as precise and unhurried as they had been before the shot. The stance, the impossible shot, the unnerving calm, the quiet, understated authority. It all coalesced in his mind, puzzle pieces from a dozen forgotten intelligence briefings and after-action reports snapping violently into place. The face was older now, etched with the immense weight of command, but the spirit behind the eyes, the ghost in the machine, was unmistakable. He had seen that same impossible calm in a grainy satellite photo once. A lone figure on a rooftop in a war-torn city, half a world away, just before a high-value target's reign of terror had ended with a single, inexplicable rifle shot from over a mile away. He walked directly to her, his path unwavering. The recruits watched, their minds struggling to process the scene. A full-bird colonel, the commander of the entire training center, was ignoring a drill sergeant and walking with an air of profound deference toward a civilian woman who, just moments before, had been the object of their collective ridicule. Davies stopped a respectful 3 feet from her. His voice, when he spoke, was low, filled with a reverence that bordered on awe, a tone that no one on that range had ever heard him use before. "Ma'am," he began, the word now carrying its proper weight. "Forgive me. Is it you? Is it really you?" The question hung in the dry air, thick with implication. The woman finished clearing the rifle, placed it gently back on the rack, and turned to face him. A flicker of recognition, of shared history in dangerous places, passed through her pale blue eyes. She offered a small, single nod. "It's been a long time, Colonel Davies," she said, her voice even and calm. "You're looking well." The simple confirmation, delivered without a hint of drama, landed like a thunderclap, shaking the very foundations of every assumption that had been made on that dusty firing range. The world had just turned upside down, and only 2 people seemed to know which way was up. Colonel Davies absorbed her confirmation, his military bearing the only thing keeping his shock from showing on his face. He took a deep, steadying breath, then turned to face the assembled group. His expression had transformed from awe to a cold, controlled fury. He fixed his gaze on Sergeant Miller, and his voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it carried the deadly precision of a laser-guided weapon. "Sergeant," he began, the word sergeant sounding like an accusation. "Do you have any idea who you just spoke to? Do you have any idea what you just witnessed?" Miller, who had never felt so small in his entire life, could only shake his head, his ability to form words having completely abandoned him. The colonel didn't wait for an answer. He swept his arm out, indicating the woman who stood silently beside him. "You recruits, listen up. You are witnessing a piece of living history. This is not, ma'am. This is not some lost civilian." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle before he unleashed them. "This is General Eva Rostova, the name, the rank, descended on the range like a physical weight, crushing the air from every lung." The recruits' eyes went wide with disbelief. Sergeant Miller looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. Davies wasn't finished. He began to list her credentials, his voice rising with each new honor, turning her biography into a litany of legendary accomplishments. Call sign, Spectre. Current commander of Joint Special Operations Command. Architect of Operation Nightfall in the Panjshir Valley. Recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross for actions taken during the Siege of Ramadi. The Silver Star. Twice. The Bronze Star with Valor. The woman who literally wrote the book on modern military marksmanship. The very training manual you are failing so miserably to teach. Sergeant was not just signed off on her desk. It was written in her hand. He let that sink in, twisting the knife of Miller's ignorance. Then he pointed a trembling finger at the simple blue windbreaker Eva had placed on a nearby bench. "That jacket," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The one your recruit saw fit to toss in the dirt. The one you dismissed as lost and found. That's her civilian windbreaker. Her actual jacket, Sergeant, the one with 4 stars of polished silver on each shoulder, is hanging in a closet in the E-ring of the Pentagon, in an office that overlooks the very heart of our nation's defense. You did not just disrespect a civilian. You disrespected a living legend, a 4-star general. And in the process, you have disgraced yourselves and this entire training command. The shaming was absolute, a public vivisection of arrogance and prejudice, performed with the surgical precision of a man defending not just a superior officer, but the very ideal of quiet, earned competence that she embodied. Sergeant Miller felt the blood drain from his face, leaving behind a cold, clammy numbness. The world had tilted on its axis. The foundations of his reality, built on the simple bedrock of rank, uniform, and aggressive confidence, had been pulverized into dust. He looked at the woman, at General Rostova, and saw her for the first time. The quiet demeanor was not weakness, it was control. The unassuming clothes were not a mistake, they were camouflage. The silence was not confusion. It was the profound confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone, least of all to him. With a monumental effort, he unglued his boots from the gravel. He took 2 stiff, robotic steps forward, stopped directly in front of General Rostova, and executed the sharpest, most mechanically perfect salute of his entire career. His arm snapped up, his hand rigid, his posture a textbook illustration of military deference. "General, ma'am," he stammered, his voice raw and unrecognizable. There are no words. There are no excuses. My actions were unprofessional and unforgivable. I offer my deepest, most sincere apologies." His arrogance was gone, stripped away, leaving only the raw, humbling truth of his monumental error. General Rostova regarded him for a long moment, her pale blue eyes analytical, not angry. She returned his salute with a crispness that made his own look clumsy by comparison. "Your standards are slipping, Sergeant," she said, her voice even, devoid of malice. It was a statement of fact, a diagnosis. "Fix them, not with volume, with precision. Your recruits are a reflection of your instruction. Show them how. Don't just tell them." She then turned her gaze to the recruits, who were still standing like statues, barely breathing. "Assumptions are a liability," she said, her voice sweeping over them. "Today, it cost you your pride. In the field, it will get you and your brothers killed. Learn from this. Remember today." With that, she gave a final, formal nod to Colonel Davies and began walking toward a black, unmarked sedan that had pulled up silently at the edge of the range. The story of that moment, of the day Spectre visited the range, spread through the base like a flash fire. It was whispered in the mess halls, recounted with embellishments in the barracks, and typed furiously into emails that shot from Fort Irwin to command posts around the globe. The legend was born not in a hail of gunfire, but in a moment of profound, deafening silence, punctuated by a single, perfect rifle shot and the complete dismantling of one man's ignorant pride. The core of the story never changed. A quiet woman in a blue windbreaker had reminded an entire generation of new soldiers that true strength, true authority, doesn't need to raise its voice. The encounter with General Rostova was not merely a humiliation for Sergeant Miller. It was a crucible. It burned away the dross of his arrogance, leaving behind something harder, purer. In the days that followed, he was a changed man. The swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet, intense focus. The yelling stopped. The constant stream of insults and demeaning jokes dried up completely. He sequestered himself in his office for hours, not sulking, but studying. He reread the Army's marksmanship manual, the one he had always treated as a mere checklist, but this time he read it with new eyes. He saw not just rules, but a deep, underlying philosophy of patience, discipline, and economy of motion. He saw the wisdom of General Rostova woven into every paragraph. His teaching style underwent a radical transformation. He began spending one-on-one time with the recruits who struggled the most, the very ones he would have previously washed out of the program with a barrage of verbal abuse. He'd get down on the ground with them, physically adjusting their grip, talking them through the calming rhythm of box breathing. He used patience as his primary tool, not intimidation. And he started every new class with a story. He would gather the recruits and tell them about the quiet woman in the windbreaker. He didn't spare himself in the telling. He recounted his own foolishness, his own blind prejudice, with brutal honesty. The story became a parable, a foundational lesson, not about shooting, but about humility. It was a warning against the poison of assumption. The day after the incident, Miller had walked the entire 600 meters to the target berm. After a long search, he found it. A small, slightly flattened piece of brass, the spent casing from General Rostova's impossible shot. He took it back to the barracks, polished it until it shone like gold, and mounted it in a small, glass-fronted shadow box. He hung it on the wall of the main instruction classroom on the range. Beneath it, he affixed a simple brass plaque, the words engraved in stark, block letters. Assumptions are a liability. Gen. E. Rostova. The casing became a sacred object, a touchstone for every soldier who passed through the range. They would look at that small piece of brass and be reminded that the most dangerous weapon on any battlefield is a closed mind. Miles away, in a secure briefing room at the Pentagon, an aide made a passing reference to the Fort Irwin incident, which was now the stuff of military folklore. General Rostova, standing before a map of global hotspots, didn't even turn around. The recruits needed a course correction, she stated flatly. The sergeant will be a better instructor for it. The force will be stronger. That's all that matters. Her focus, as always, was on the future, on the quiet, unending work of forging a better military, one soldier, one lesson at a time. A year passed. The sun beat down on the same Fort Irwin firing range, but the atmosphere was fundamentally different. The air was still thick with the smell of cordite and hot metal, but the oppressive tension of fear was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of focused, professional calm. A new class of recruits lay on the firing line, their movements measured and confident. Pacing behind them was Sergeant Miller. He was leaner, his face absent the perpetual sneer, his eyes clear and observant. His voice, when he gave instructions, was low and even, each word chosen for maximum clarity and impact. Before the impossible shot drill began, he gathered the recruits around the shadow box in the instruction room. He tapped the glass, drawing their attention to the gleaming shell casing within. "Before you pick up that rifle," he began, his voice resonating with the conviction of a convert, "you need to understand something. The weapon doesn't make the soldier. The uniform doesn't make the soldier. The rank on your chest doesn't make the soldier." He paused, letting his gaze pass over each young face. "Competence does, and competence is quiet." He then told them the story. He told them about his own arrogance, his own blindness. He described the quiet woman in the blue windbreaker, her absolute stillness, her methodical movements. He recreated the scene of the impossible shot, his voice filled with the same awe he had felt that day. "She never raised her voice," he concluded. "She never listed her accomplishments. She never demanded our respect. She commanded it with a single, perfect action. She taught me, and now I'm teaching you, the most important lesson you will ever learn in this man's army. Judge a person by the steadiness of their hands, not the volume of their voice. Judge them by their actions, not their appearance." The story was no longer just a piece of base gossip. It had become doctrine. It was the first lesson every recruit learned, a foundational parable about the virtues of humility and the power of quiet professionalism. The results were undeniable. The marksmanship scores for graduates from Fort Irwin had skyrocketed. More importantly, the soldiers emerging from Miller's tutelage were different. They were calmer under pressure, more analytical, less prone to bravado. They carried themselves with a quiet confidence that was the unmistakable echo of General Rostova's example. The legacy of her brief, unannounced visit was not a plaque on a wall or a story told over beers. It was a tangible, measurable improvement in the quality of the American soldier. It was a generation of warriors who understood that the loudest person in the room is often the weakest. In her sprawling office at the Pentagon, the walls adorned with maps and commendations, General Eva Rostova reviewed the personnel files of the top graduates from the Army's various training commands. It was a ritual she performed quarterly, a way of keeping her finger on the pulse of the next generation of leaders. Her finger traced down a list of names from Fort Irwin, noting the exceptionally high qualification scores. She stopped at one name in particular, a young woman, a private first class, who had not only aced every marksmanship drill, but had also received a special commendation from her drill instructor, Sergeant Miller, for her calm leadership under pressure. The commendation read, PFC Sanchez embodies the principle of quiet competence. She leads by example, not by volume. Her professionalism is a credit to the uniform. Rostova allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was not a smile of victory or of vindication. It was a smile of quiet satisfaction, the kind a master gardener feels upon seeing a seed, planted long ago, grow into a strong, healthy tree. Her work was not about a single moment of glory on a dusty firing range. It was about continuation. It was about ensuring the core principles of discipline, humility, and competence were not just words in a manual, but a living legacy passed from one soldier to the next. True strength, she knew, is never announced with a trumpet blast. It is proven in the crucible of a single, decisive moment. It is the quiet hands that are steadier in the storm, the calm voice that cuts through the chaos, the humble heart that holds the deepest well of resolve. Respect is not a prize to be demanded. It is a reflection, an echo that answers a lifetime of silent, disciplined action. The 4 silver stars on her shoulders were not the source of her authority. They were merely the consequence of it, an external symbol for a character that had been forged in fire and defined by a profound and unwavering humility. They were an afterthought to a career built on deeds, not declarations, on action, not assumption. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.